The Buffalo Bills should have their way with the Jacksonville Jaguars this Sunday when they face off in London. Lineup optimizers are favoring that outcome, as well as Las Vegas, when we're looking at a 48.5-point total with Buffalo as 5.5-point favorites. So there's lots of underlying stats to support that as well. Buffalo is third in the NFL in generating a 42.7% pressure rate, and Trevor Lawrence only has a 45% completion rate when he's under pressure. According to Rich Rebar, Trevor Lawrence is averaging 6.6 yards per attempt, which is 24th in the league. He's got 6.7 air yards per attempt, which is 30th in the league. And he has only a 2.8% touchdown rate, which is 27th in the league. On top of that, Buffalo is allowing the fourth fewest passing yards per game, and Trevor Lawrence is 15th in passing yards to game with only 235. Buffalo also is allowing the least amount of DK points per game to quarterback with 9.6, while Trevor Lawrence is only scoring 20th in DK points per game with 15.5. But did you also know that Buffalo is dealing with a series of injuries to their defense, which are going to have a huge impact to this game? Buffalo is missing now Greg Rousseau from the D-line. He's out. And on top of that, Tre'Davious White is now out for the season with an Achilles injury. Von Miller should be back this week, but he's going to be likely on a snap count after coming back from an ACL tear. We're not sure for sure that he's coming back, so keep an eye on the news, but it's looking like Von Miller will be back. He's traveled with the team to London. On top of that, Cam Robinson on the offensive line for the Jacksonville Jaguars is back, which is a huge boost to Jacksonville's offensive line. We've seen Trevor Lawrence struggling all season, struggling to get those passes to his receivers, throwing barely out of bounds. Receivers can't get their feet in bounds when catching touchdowns. And on top of that, the receivers have dropped the most balls for Jacksonville out of the entire league. So Trevor Lawrence has been struggling to get in sync with his receivers, and a large part of that has to do with the offensive line. Cam Robinson back is a huge boost to that offensive line. So knowing the problems with the defense that the Bills are facing, on top of the Bills have just traveled to London a couple days ago versus Jacksonville, which has been in London for a couple weeks, we have to ask ourselves the million-dollar question, which is, can the Jags offense keep up with the Bills this week? Hey, what's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heatseeker Sports. Joined today by my friend Spread Astaire. We're going to go over the Jacksonville versus Buffalo game for Sunday's NFL London game. And it's a DraftKings Showdown that we'll be building lineups for today. And Spread, how's it going, man? It's been a couple weeks since you joined me on Gamescript. And the last time you joined me, you ended up dropping a bomb with the Adam Thielen captain lineup. How's it going?
Oh, I'm doing great, and I'm excited for this one. I love these early morning starts here. Some people don't like them. For us, it's 6:30 on the West Coast. Get up early, have some coffee. It's me and the birds chirping, watching some NFL.
Yeah, I like it too. I like having a game going on in the background while I'm building my lineups for the main slate. And I also like the showdown slates on these because it seems like people haven't really focused on the game. So people are focused more on the main slate. So there hasn't been a lot of attention paid towards these London games. And those are the type of slates that I like because you can get an edge on people just by doing a bunch of research ahead of time and putting together a solid lineup with a good theory and solid correlation and everything. And we'll be building a couple lineups for you guys in this show. We'll build a chalky one, and then Spread and I will each pick captains and build a couple more for you guys. But before we get into it, hit like on the video and hit subscribe on the YouTube channel because we do these for every showdown slate. I've been putting out captain plays left and right that have been hit on DJ Moore this past week. He was basically called him a lock as a captain play this week, and he ended up going off for something like 50, 60 DraftKings points. So he ended up being a huge play there. And if you watch that show and followed the advice on that one, you made some money, at least in the captain spot. So we'll take a look at this player pool first, and we'll get into all of this players for this matchup here. So leading things off, the obvious, Josh Allen. He's probably the most likely to score the highest raw points on the game and raw DraftKings points in this game, but that doesn't necessarily make him the best captain, because he's also 12,200 is his salary, and that's going to restrict you for the rest of your lineup. But what are your thoughts here on Josh Allen in this game, Spread?
This is a fantastic matchup. I think the biggest wrinkle this year is the fact that Jacksonville's been here. So most times the travel is kind of a wash. We give Jacksonville a bit of an edge because they do it every single year. So they're used to it as an organization. And now that they're starting to get some continuity on their roster, their players are starting to get used to it as well. But I don't think we can overlook how big a fact it is that these teams, Buffalo's getting in this week. Jacksonville's been over there for a week and a half now. So the time acclimation will definitely be in their favor. Now, you asked me about Josh Allen coming off a fantastic game against Miami, right? In the betting world, it might be time to sell high on this team. We talked about that in the Miami game, going, boy, I don't know if I like them coming off a 50-point win going into their biggest game of the year. Maybe would have liked them to have a little more adversity, because we know teams coming off these huge wins don't perform well against the spread. So I think you're right. Obviously Josh Allen has the highest percentage to be the highest fantasy scoring player in this matchup. But at the same time, at the price, I'm definitely not interested in him at captain.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
You try and get him in there, but I think there's better ways to build so you can get him and some of these other top players in. So we'll see how it goes. And of course, if he absolutely nukes, and for a quarterback to really go off, he needs to be so distributing the ball, right? Because if he just goes to Stephon Diggs the whole time, or Gabe Davis, and those will be the optimal captains. So not only would he have to go off, he'd have to go off by distributing the ball. And I don't think that we'll see that here. So I want to have Josh Allen in my lineup, but not a captain.
Yeah, and Josh Allen coming off of a 39.5-point fantasy game against Miami. Josh Allen has traditionally done well against Miami, and he basically wins AFC Player of the Week every time he faces Miami. On top of that performance, he put up 22 points against Washington, 23 against Las Vegas, and then 13 against the Jets. None of those three scores would likely be enough to pay off having Josh Allen in the captain. He'd need a more 39.5-point score, which is going to be tough to repeat, especially what Spread mentioned coming on this trip to London and having all the jet lag involved. On top of playing a decent defense in the Jaguars, because Jacksonville is only allowing 19 points a game to quarterback. They haven't faced a whole bunch of quarterback competition, but they did face Patrick Mahomes. So Jacksonville is doing well versus quarterback this year. So next is Stephon Diggs. Diggs, I'd be more likely to put Diggs in the captain than Josh Allen. But one way that I like to go, and we'll get into this when I build, my lineup spread, is fading Diggs and putting Josh Allen as a flex player in my lineups, because I think Diggs is going to be obviously a popular choice. He has another guy who's been on fire this year. He scored 39 fantasy points last week, 22 the week before that, 13 against Vegas, and then 29 against the Jets. So he's been on fire basically this season. And with Diggs, you got to figure that he's gonna have a slow game eventually. And if you're building lineups without one of those big bills in the captain spot, I think it makes sense to go lighter on Stephon Diggs this week and focus more on those Jacksonville heavy builds. What are your thoughts on Diggs this week, Spread? What are you thinking on him?
All right, Simon, my computer's freezing up. So if I'm not, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, yep. Great. Yeah, you won't be able to see me moving around here as I'm getting that rainbow circle there on the Apple computer. I think that Stephon Diggs is a perfect week to fade him. He's coming off that huge performance, but he had such a great matchup against Miami. There's a reason that Miami brought in Jalen Ramsey, because they knew that Xavier Howard, as good as he was, is not the player that he was. And Diggs had just had a wonderful matchup there. I think it's going to be a lot tougher this week against a Jacksonville team that, although they don't have the same name value as those two corners down there in Miami, they're actually playing better if you're looking at the ratings. So I'm fine.
Well, we just lost Spread. He'll be back here in a minute. But Diggs, on top of what Spread just mentioned, Diggs is targeted the most in zone defense, which is run by Jacksonville. So he does have that going for him. But I do think that from a game theory perspective, if you want to get different in your lineups this week, you're going to have to pick one of these big guys maybe to fade, unless you want to get weird with cheap guys. And I prefer to go more heavy on the Jacksonville side and, play a little bit less of a guy like Diggs. I'm not going to fade him completely, but I'm not going to go all in on Diggs in, like the flex or in captain. I think it makes more sense to play him in a captain spot, though. Trevor Lawrence went over him at the top of the show. He's been having struggles this year, and it's shown up in his DraftKings points. 16.5 points against Atlanta last week in London. He scored 15 the week before that against Houston. He scored 10 DraftKings points against Kansas City, and he scored about 19 against Indy. So he's had a rough start to the season as far as a DraftKings perspective, but he's also had a rough start to the season in real stats, because he's just been not necessarily under a ton of pressure, but I think his O-line is just been failing him, and his timing has been off, and he's been barely missing guys in the end zone who end up toe tapping out of bounds, and he's been just looking out of sync with his receivers. So Trevor Lawrence has had a rough start to the season, hoping that Cam Robinson adds some relief to Trevor Lawrence and helps get him back in sync with his timing and his receivers. So moving on to Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley has been up and down this season, mainly down. He had a big week in week 1, scoring 27 points against Indy. He since then scored 5 points against Kansas City. He scored 7 DraftKings points against Houston, and then he had 11.8 DraftKings points against Atlanta. Found the end zone for the first time since week 1 last week. Hopefully that's a sign that Calvin Ridley is finding his sync with this offense and finding a sync with Trevor Lawrence, but that remains to be seen. We got Zay Jones coming back this week, who should be coming back this week. Keep an eye on the injury report there, but he would be something taking targets away from Calvin Ridley. So Calvin Ridley is interesting in this matchup, especially learning that Tre'Davious White is going to be out. So Calvin Ridley is a guy that I'm interested in for sure in this matchup. Travis Etienne is looking at a decent matchup against the Bills here. They're only giving up 23 points per game to the running back position, but an interesting thing with the Bills defense here as far as running backs is that they're giving up, let's see, fourth most receiving yards to running backs. They've given up 199 off of 22 receptions, 199 receiving yards to running backs. ETN is getting about 3 to 5 targets per game, which puts him in the top 10 in the league for receptions by a running back. I mean, we should expect Jacksonville to throw a decent amount in this game. Buffalo is also giving up the most yards after contact in the league. And so everything is pointing to a good game by Travis Etienne, as long as he can find his way. He's been struggling a little bit here to begin the season, but just like the entire Jacksonville offense, Etienne could bust loose at any time here. Spread, what are your thoughts here on Travis Etienne in this matchup?
Yeah, he's been getting a lot of workload. When you're doing best ball, we were so excited about some of these camp highlights, right? The Tank Bigsby highlights, the Tank Bigsby preseason. But Etienne's getting 62% of the rushing attempts compared to 11% for Tank Bigsby, 11% of targets compared to only 1% for Tank Bigsby. And in fact, running back 3, Dearness Johnson, has more targets so far this season than Tank Bigsby. So Etienne is emerging as the clear number one. It's got to be happy for the people that were taking him in round 3 in those best ball tournaments. And I think he's got a great opportunity here. Our concern when we're playing him, right, and there's a reason this is called Gamescript, is that we don't want Jacksonville to fall behind. So I think if you're putting him in his lineup, you're going to be, if you're betting this game, you're going to be taking Jacksonville plus the points and maybe some Jacksonville money line, because if Buffalo jumps out to a 14 or 17-point lead, then Etienne's really going to be effective out of the backfield, and you're not going to get that dual threat. But if you like Jacksonville to cover the spread, which I do, I think Etienne's going to be a good play.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Spread, when you were gone, I covered a couple more of these guys. What are your thoughts on Trevor Lawrence this week?
I think this is a great opportunity for him to make a statement. Like I said, he's got a great opportunity here going against Buffalo in what I consider to be a favorable situation with the travel and the time acclimation here. So far, he hasn't set the world on fire. He's only averaging 235 yards a game here. So that's kind of rough, but this could be a good opportunity for him to break out. Still, boy, I almost think I like Allen a little more, regardless if I'm only getting one QB in the lineup, even if I do have a Jacksonville game script.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. Because the thing with Allen obviously is, he's so involved in the run game and the passing game that it'd be pretty easy for him to outscore Trevor Lawrence from a raw point perspective. Trevor Lawrence, he's an athletic guy. He gets involved in the run game too. Let's take a look and see how many rushes he's had. He's had 8 attempts against Atlanta. He had 3 versus Houston, 5 versus Kansas City, and 7 versus Indy. So Trevor Lawrence is pretty sneaky with his rushing, but I still think at the same time, when you compare him to Josh Allen, Josh Allen's basically the best rushing quarterback in the league, and Josh Allen's going to get those red zone opportunities with running, and he gets a lot of touchdowns that way. And I don't think that Trevor Lawrence is necessarily going to get those same opportunities. What are your thoughts on Calvin Ridley, Spread?
I want to talk a little bit more about Trevor Lawrence, and I have a question for you, Simon.
Yeah.
So one thing I like to do, I think this helps more for NBA than NFL, but I like to go on the team subreddits and see what the fans are saying.
Yeah.
I actually think it's a great tool. These guys, especially in the NBA, when they watch every single game of their team, right? I can't do that. I watch a lot of NBA. Tyler is, always amazed at how much NBA I watch, and I can't even come close to this. But there's a big concern around Jacksonville that why isn't Doug Peterson calling the plays? And that's what you brought him in for. And they've not been too excited about the play calling. And I'm talking about the fans. And we know fan is short for fanatic, and sometimes they can be a little bit unreasonable. But in this case, I think they've got a great point. I really think they've got a good point. This is the reason you brought this in. And I think the reason we see more offensive than defensive coaches, as far as head coaches, guys getting promoted, is because the way the rules have changed, the offensive side of the ball is so much more important. I think they're missing a little bit on the table there. When I really want to buy in on Calvin Ridley and Trevor Lawrence is when he takes over, which I think he inevitably will. From reading that. So he's a player that he's been surprising, right? And after those camp highlights, it's like, oh boy, we got to get Calvin Ridley, right? He was going in the 4th round in best ball, went all the way up to the 2nd round. By the time, if you did a draft that last Labor Day weekend, he was going pick 15, pick 16. I don't think we've seen it from him yet. Let's look at the target share. He's only at 20%. Christian Kirk is out targeting him. Christian Kirk's actually averaging more points, and I know that's from single game blowups. But at the price that you're paying for Ridley, I don't know. I think that you either go all in and you make him your captain, or maybe you find a way to work around him because it's a high price for someone who hasn't been producing so far.
Yeah, I would say one interesting note on that Christian Kirk note is that Christian Kirk started blowing up once Zay Jones went out. And Zay Jones is back this week. So I almost think that Zay Jones is going to affect, Christian Kirk more negatively than he will Calvin Ridley. Because I think Calvin Ridley's they're just going to keep having him do his thing. But I think with Christian Kirk, I know there was a criticism in week 1. Christian Kirk was playing a lot less routes. And I think it was because they were running with 2 tight end sets. And so Christian Kirk was the guy that was, kept off the field. And that was a criticism in week 1. And you can see it. He only got 3 targets in week 1. In week 2, they ended up, making it right with him. And he ended up getting 14 targets. They also lost that game 9-17. But it showed up in his fantasy points. And that week 2 is where Zay Jones went out, I believe. And since then, Christian Kirk got 6 targets against Houston. He got 12 targets against Atlanta. So Christian Kirk has been a huge benefactor of Zay Jones going out. So it'll be interesting to see, who gets affected the most when Zay Jones comes back in, because Calvin Ridley's obviously been struggling with those drops, and Christian Kirk, on the other hand, has been going off. But Christian Kirk's the slot receiver, so he's the one that suffers when they go with those 2 tight end sets.
Yeah, the 2 tight end set. Yeah. That's a great point there. One thing I'd like to say, though, is, a little counter to that, if you want to make an argument for Kirk, because I think I like him a little more when you consider the price compared to Ridley, is that with the rapport that they're building, right? Because Kirk was there last year, Ridley wasn't. Maybe some of the success over the past couple of games with Zay Jones out has kind of reignited that connection between quarterback and receiver. And so maybe he'll be able to overcome the return of Zay Jones to the lineup a little bit more. Also, it'll be interesting to see if they use that 2 tight end set as much against a Buffalo team that does play a little more nickel than usual, but will they with their star corner out? So we have a lot of interesting, that we're going to study for the rest of the year here. Yeah, Tre'Davious White being out changes that defense a lot. We know how much a shutdown corner can allow defensive coordinators to blitz more, play different type of zones, maybe only have, you got one guy playing man and the other 10 guys playing zone. So many things you can do when you have a player of that caliber. That was a big loss for Buffalo, especially someone for me that's saying, hey, this might be Buffalo's year, right? Buffalo versus KC. Cincinnati's not looking good. A lot of people wanted Jacksonville to make that leap. We haven't seen it. But now they're going to have to overcome that injury, and we'll see if the Jaguars are able to take advantage of it. But I'm still high on Christian Kirk here. I mean, even if you look at captain, right? I mean, 9,900 compared to 14,700. That's the difference between me having to punt a position and getting players that we all expect to have high target shares in this lineup.
Yeah, for sure. I would imagine that Christian Kirk's ownership is going to be pretty high. Let me check out what his projected ownership is. I'm using RG's Roto-Grinders projected ownership. I see Christian Kirk at 35% overall. And in the captain, what do we have as Christian Kirk in the captain? I'm seeing about 7-8% ownership in the captain. Those are projections right
Do
now.
those surprise you?
What's that spread?
Does that surprise you, or is that exactly about what you expected?
It's about what I expected because we got so many huge weapons in this game, like with obviously Josh Allen, who's going to be the highest owned on the slate, and then Steph Diggs will be number 2, and then Trevor Lawrence is probably number 3, just because like he's a big name quarterback and people like to go to quarterback and captain sometimes. Mm-hmm. But we also got we got Calvin Ridley, Travis Etienne. Like there's so many directions you can go and captain in this game. That it does make sense that Christian Kirk would be a little bit underowned. And let's see what Buffalo's doing against the slot. Buffalo has been good against the slot. They're only allowing 12 DK points a game to the slot.
I wonder if that's even going to help us though, because we know, right? Because each corner with Tre'Davious White up now, right? You got CB4 instead of CB3 right there.
Right. Yep. That's true. Yep. Banged up secondary. So anything
CB4 actually great name of an old 90s comedy movie starring Chris Rock.
I remember that one. Chris Rock, right?
Maybe he'll be out there covering the slot receiver.
There we go. So that brings us to Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne, we went over some of his situation when I was doing it solo for a minute. There's a spread, but what are your thoughts on Travis Etienne in this matchup?
I think he's had a slow start, and people who drafted him high in best ball have been disappointed. But I think as the season progresses, you're going to be happy to have those shares. I think people like me that thought they were being clever and waiting until round 10 and grabbing Tank Bigsby and thinking it was going to be a 50-50 share, right, or a running back by committee. I think that as the season continues, that's going to be less and less obvious. So, those Tank Bigsby shares probably aren't going to come into play unless Etienne misses some meaningful time. I think he's a great option here. Like I said, this is where betting is fun. I don't think you put Etienne in your lineup if you think Buffalo is going to cover the spread. Right.
Yeah, you're right. If
you think Buffalo blows them out, then no. I mean, yes, you'll get some PPR with the dump offs and everything, but if I have him at 12-9 as the captain, or if we just go to flex, he's at 8-6. The amount of money I'm spending, I need a dual threat there. Because you look at the opportunity cost of giving up a guy like James Cook, who in that same script that we're talking about would be a better play at 8,400, in my opinion. The Bills are up by 14. If they're covering the spread, I think I'd rather have James Cook. So that's where the betting comes in. I do like Jacksonville here, though. So I'm interested in Etienne. I'm actually very interested in him. I think that, if I built 10 lineups, I'd want to have him in at least 5.
Yeah. Yeah, and James Cook, that brings us to another interesting situation because he's a guy that might get lost in the shuffle a little bit with all these other. It's a tricky slate for building with all these offensive weapons because James Cook, we're looking at a salary of 8,400, which makes sense for a starting running back on the Bills with a heavy favorite in this matchup. Supposedly playing in the Bills' home stadium on this one, although. Jacksonville is the team that, it's the UK's team basically. Mm-hmm. So that leaves Cook kind of lost in the shuffle. What has Cook done so far? Cook hasn't been getting those red zone carries. They've been going to Latavius Murray and to a lesser extent Damian Harris. And Latavius Murray has been coming in a lot on passing downs and third down work. So, Cook is an interesting guy in this good contrarian play, I'd say. He had 12 attempts last week. He had 15 the week before that, 17 and 12. Those were his attempts. Hasn't really done too much as far as a fantasy perspective. 14.7 points, 13.2, 22.9, and 10.3. But Spread, why don't you give your thoughts on Cook there? I'm going to run down and get my my charger too because my computer is running out of batteries here.
All right, you go do that. I'll hold down the fort. Not surprised that James Cook is not getting these red zone carries. We knew this preseason, and that was one of the reasons why you could get him in later rounds because you knew you were going to have to be accumulating these points. Simply through rushing, receiving, and the PPR. So Latavius Murray, I'm also not surprised that he's the red zone back. That guy is one of the best players I've ever seen it simply falling forward. It always feels like after contact, he gets an extra yard or two. And in the red zone, that's where that really matters, where if I can make contact at the yard and a half and still get in the end zone every time, I'm an important player here. Now, I'm seeing that Murray actually hasn't had as many touchdowns as I expected here, but like I said, I'm not surprised that Murray's getting that work here. Regardless, Cook is going to have so many opportunities in between the 20s. I still think he's a good play, especially if you like Buffalo to cover the spread here. But yeah, Murray, not surprising me at all that he's getting this red zone work. Just one of the best guys running in between the tackles and finishing through contact that we've seen for years. I mean, there's a reason he's still in the league after all these years. Like, nobody falls forward better than him.
Yeah. Latavius Murray always seems to come in and be a thorn in like a fantasy favorite running back side. And this year it's James Cook who has to deal with him, poaching those touchdowns and getting all that valuable work. And I mean, Latavius Murray's not putting up huge numbers himself, but he's getting a decent amount of the passing work. He had 2 targets versus Miami. He had 1 target versus Washington. He had 2 versus Las Vegas and 2 versus the Jets. So he's been active, and he's getting high leverage carries, and he's taking those high leverage carries away from Cook. You basically need Cook to break off a big run to score a touchdown, which he hasn't done yet this year. But last week, I think Cook scored his first touchdown, and he actually got the carry in the red zone. So he finally got an opportunity last week, and actually he didn't score a touchdown. He received a touchdown, so he got a passing touchdown. He didn't even get to run it. So,
and I know we're frustrated as fantasy players, but if you're a coach, there's really no reason to have a guy like James Cook in there if you're less than 5 yards to go.
Yeah,
no,
you're right.
Why the extra wear and tear when you can just have another guy? Just because that's going to be the most high impact collisions of the game.
Yeah,
everybody knows. Get to 1, 2. Everybody knows you're running. So I know it can be frustrating for fantasy owners, but don't get too down on these coaches. It's actually smart for the franchise overall. If you're a Buffalo Bills fan, you need Cook to be fresh in December. You're going to need him in January, especially if you're trying to hold off teams like Miami, Kansas City, if Cincinnati ever gets right, if Jacksonville continues to improve. These are all high-powered offenses. You're going to have to keep the ball away from them, and you can't afford that injury. So while it can be frustrating for fantasy owners, there's a reason he went in the 8th round, and there's a reason why, even though you watch his highlights, he's one of the top runners in the league. He's only 8,400 on this slate.
Yeah, and Jacksonville, by the way, has been pretty good against running backs. They're only allowing 18 points per game to running backs, 18 DraftKings points a game to running backs. So just a tough matchup for James Cook in general, or at least a middling matchup. So not the best matchup, but if you're putting James Cook in and knowing what we just like talked about with him not getting those high leverage carries, you're probably going to want him to either break off a long touchdown, or you need him to maybe catch a couple of touchdowns. So that is something that you want to take into account when you're building your lineup and creating your game script, because correlation and game script is hugely important when it comes to building these showdown lineups. If you want to put in like 2 or 3 lineups when everybody else is putting in 150 and you want to compete against those guys, you got to think your game script through, and you got to think about different scenarios about why this player is going to score like this amount of points to justify having him in my lineup, and who's going to be affected by this player scoring this amount of points. So you really got to think every roster decision through, and James Cook, you want to consider that when you're putting him in your lineup. If you're putting Cook in your lineup, it's because most likely he's receiving a touchdown or 2. And in that situation, you obviously want Josh Allen in your lineup too. So if you were going to fade, or not fade, but if you were going to leave out Josh Allen or Stephon Diggs in a lineup with, James Cook, you would want to leave out you would want to leave out maybe Josh Allen if you think that James Cook is going to get those high leverage carries in the end zone, and you want to leave out Stephon Diggs if you think that Josh Allen is going to throw a couple touchdown passes to James Cook maybe. So let's move on to Gabe Davis here. Gabe Davis, he's kind of been up and down for a couple years now. This season, he scored 15 fantasy points last week, 10 fantasy points the week before that against Washington, 21 fantasy points against Vegas, and then 5 in week 1. So Gabe Davis looks like he's, turned it on a little bit this year, but his targets, he's got 3 targets versus Miami, 4 targets versus Washington, 7 versus Vegas, and 4 versus the Jets. So you can pretty much pencil him in for maybe like 3 targets. 3-4 targets in a game like this could be a little bit underwhelming. And you're going to need, I have a feeling you're going to need more than 15 fantasy points to show up in an optimal lineup. But Spread, what are your thoughts on Gabe Davis? I'm not hugely interested in him this week.
One thing I like to say is he's quietly becoming consistent. I mean, last year didn't feel like it was like 32 and then 4, 4, 4, 4, 5. And then 28, right? Right, 15, 10, and 21 after a slow opening night against the New York Jets. So that's one nice thing that I can say if you want to put him in there. Before, it just felt like it was boom or bust. Now it feels a little safer to put him in your lineup where even if he doesn't go off, he's not going to bury you because, boy, I mean, if you take a 3 at that salary of $7,200, I mean, that's going to bury your lineup. So I do think he's a little safer this year, but I'm with you. I'm staying away from him overall. I think there's better people in that range. I mean, I'm just so much more interested in Christian Kirk, who's cheaper.
Yeah, Christian Kirk, I'm more interested in him too. If you're going game theory, it would make more sense to take Gabe Davis over Christian Kirk because Christian Kirk probably have more ownership. And if you wanted to kind of build around the theory that maybe Zay Jones will impact Christian Kirk more than it will Calvin Ridley, then I think it would make a little bit more sense to put Gabe Davis in. But I prefer Christian Kirk miles over Gabe Davis. And we went over him a little bit earlier. His targets have just been off the charts, like at least since Zay Jones was out. He had 12 targets last week, 6 targets the week before that, 14 targets the week before that. And it's showing up in his fantasy points too with 16.4, 15.4, and 24.96. So Christian Kirk has just been on fire, and we've covered him enough. We can slide down here a little bit to Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is an interesting guy. The Bills have not allowed a ton of points to the tight end position. They've only allowed 6, but they haven't really faced any decent tight ends, and none of the caliber of Evan Ingram. Let's take a look at what Ingram's done. He got 12.9 fantasy points last week. He got 14 the week before that, 12 the week before that, and 10 the week before that. He's been pretty consistent with his targets. He's had 8 targets 3 weeks in a row. In week 1, he had 5. Spread, what are your thoughts here on Evan Ingram in this matchup? What kind of usage do you think that Evan Ingram as a tight end in in a game like this? Like, do you think that they'll try to work him in this game more, knowing that Buffalo has a tough tight end defense? Like, what kind of usage do you think he gets this week?
Buffalo has excellent safeties. They run strong schemes. I'm not surprised that they're not vulnerable to tight ends. Evan Ingram, if you're comfortable getting 13 points for 5,800, put him in there. I mean, he's been really consistent here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think you can make arguments with them. I do not think this is a breakout game for him.
Yeah. And one thing I will say about Ingram is he has yet to score a touchdown this year. And then we're heading into week 5. So that game is going to come, and hopefully it doesn't come against Buffalo if Spread and I are not playing a bunch of Evan Ingram this week. Hopefully it comes next week when we get him a little bit sneakier in the main slate. But or 2 weeks. I don't know if they have a bye next week or not. But Evan Ingram is a guy that, you wouldn't expect to have a big game in this matchup. His salary is only $5,800, which makes him a guy that people will probably look towards when they're in that situation where they only have like 6K in salary left, and it's like Evan Ingram. He's cheaper than he should be, given the workload that he gets, but the matchup, makes him a risky play even at this salary.
The thing is, you look at these other players, right? Like Dalton Kincaid, he's averaging about 6.5 points per game, fantasy points, DK points.
Yep.
He's only 800 cheaper.
Yep.
I mean, it just feels like Ingram's going to be so popular in that range.
Yeah,
extra 800 for doubling my score.
Yeah, especially with the situation with the tight ends in Buffalo. Like the tight ends are basically splitting an even workload, so people are going to shy away there. And then you look at Dalton Kincaid. I got him up right now. He's gotten 5 targets last week, 2 targets a week before that, but he's got 6 targets and 4 targets. So, like he's getting the work, and like in a game like this, maybe he gets the same amount of targets as a guy like Evan Ingram, and they have a better matchup than Evan Ingram has, because the Jacksonville Jaguars are giving up 15 points per game to tight end, and it just sets them up to have a bigger score than Evan Ingram. Better matchup, like the shying away of ownership, like due to a timeshare split with Dawson Knox. And then on top of that, Evan Ingram being cheaper and a better guy to, like probably a more popular target. So, yeah, that makes Dalton Kincaid interesting for sure. Since we're talking about tight ends, might as well get into Dawson Knox, who I think is also interesting. Dawson Knox has been getting more red zone opportunities than Dalton Kincaid, but Dalton Kincaid is seems like the better, more skilled tight end, but Dawson Knox just seems to be getting those red zone opportunities. But if you look at the targets the last few weeks, Dawson Knox got 1 target last week, 2 targets the week before that. Weeks 1 and 2, he had 5 targets and 4 targets. So it seems like Dalton Kincaid is starting to get more of that work, which could be interesting in this situation with a good matchup against Jacksonville. What are your thoughts on Dawson Knox spread, and what do you think that Kincaid is as a rookie starting to gain more of that share and take this job away from Dawson Knox?
No. And I'll tell you why. Because in the red zone, Dawson Knox gives you camouflage, so to speak.
Yep.
With the idea that when he's in there, I'm viewing him as a run blocker, but he can still catch those passes. So it feels like I can go either direction with him on the field, where Dalton Kincaid is a much more pass catcher style tight end, right? So I want to use him in between the 20s more. I want to split him out wide. When I get Kincaid involved, I want that big play potential. So I think this is going to be an issue all year, because I think that McDermott and the offensive coordinator in Buffalo, Ken Dorsey still, right? They enjoy the versatility that Knox is going to give them in the red zone. So while Kincaid will probably continue to improve, it might be another James Cook situation where he's going to get you a bunch of targets and yards as he continues to develop this season, but those touchdowns might not be there.
Yeah. And I will say about the Buffalo tight ends, both of them come in projected under 20% ownership. So, take your pick there. If you think that, maybe Kincaid can break off a long one, that makes him interesting. If you think that Dawson Knox maybe gets one in the red zone, then that would be interesting too. So both. And
also, if you go for because you're gambling on both, you're spending a little less there on the Dawson Knox there, only 3,800.
Yep, for sure. So I think both of them have opportunity tonight. I don't hate either one of them if you need to slip them in the lineup for salary relief. Zay Jones, we talked about a little bit. He's coming off of an injury. He had a banged up knee, it looks like, and he missed a couple weeks. And last game that we saw him was in week 2, where he had 6 targets, no receptions, and 0 fantasy points. Week before that, he had 7 targets, like 5 receptions for 16.5 fantasy points. He's kind of been he's been one of Trevor Lawrence's favorite targets over these last couple years. And the fact that he's getting like 7 targets and 6 targets, even with Calvin Ridley in the lineup, and knowing that Christian Kirk got 14 targets in week 2. Zay Jones is still on the radar, and he's cheap. He's cheap here this week at 5,600. So, Spread, what are you thinking on Zay Jones here? What do you think his situation is coming off this injury? How much of a concern is that to you?
It's a huge concern to me. I think that since I like the way that I'm going to build the top of my lineup more, I'd rather go with a consistent player like Evan Ingram for only 200 more. And if Zay Jones beats you, he beats you. But I'm a little worried coming off the injury. Also a little worried about the KC game log, right? And did you have the game log up? 6 targets, no receptions.
Yeah. 6 targets and no receptions.
A little bit of rest there too, because these guys had it. Obviously, he likes him, but they got to work some things out. So I'm fine staying away from Zay Jones this week, and if he beats me, he beats me.
Yeah, and another thing that improved offensive line might help is the timing getting back in sync with these guys. But as we've seen with Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk, the sync issues have not been a problem with them, connecting frequently this season, and Christian Kirk basically being the best receiver on the team so far. Win over Dalton Kincaid. I like both these kickers. I like Tyler Bass and I like Brandon McManus. Last game that we saw these two teams play, I believe it was a 9-6 final score. So the kickers were basically the only ones who scored in that game. But Tyler Bass got a big leg, and in a situation where you might expect, we're keeping Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs out of the captain's spot. They got to get stalled out in the red zone a lot in order for us to justify doing that. And who's going to come in to soak up those points is Tyler Bass, and he's looking at 14 fantasy points last week, 15 the week before that, 8 the week before that, and 13 the week before that. And I think in a game like this, we could see a decent amount of field goal attempts, and Tyler Bass is about as good as it gets for fantasy goodness there. What do you think there, Spread?
Yeah, the kickers are always kind of a dice roll, right? Because you're hoping that these drives stall out. I agree with you, though, on Bass. This is one that I don't think that our game script really helps us at all, right? I mean, it's hard to just tell who's going to be good in the red zone and who's not. And even if a certain team jumps out to a lead, that doesn't make you favor a kicker even more. Like if I tell you it's going to be 21-0 at half Buffalo, I mean, going into the second half, I don't know if that really does. So always interesting options with kickers. How much success have you had putting kickers here into these showdown lineups?
Oh, lots of success. Yeah, kickers are some of my favorite guys to put in there, especially guys like this, like McManus. Look at McManus's game log. He's got 14 last week versus Atlanta. He had 5 the week before that, 10 the week before that, 8 the week before that. So these guys can put up, especially guys like Bass and McManus, they can put up easily double-digit fantasy points in a game that could potentially, like if it plays out a little bit disappointing where they hit the under. It seems like Vegas wants you to bet the over, but like we're talking about a team that's been staying in London for 2 weeks versus a team that just flew into London. They're in a weird environment. Buffalo's coming off that huge win against Miami, and Jacksonville's had a sluggish offense to start the year. Like, how sure are we that these guys are going to be able to convert on these touchdowns and stuff? And, we could see Bass and McManus kicking 50-yard field goals a few times in this game. So, yeah, I definitely like
maybe the fans of the Premier League will appreciate that too.
Yeah.
These guys out there with their big legs.
Yep, there you go. So, apart from kickers, we can look at the Bills defense. What are your thoughts on the Bills defense? I'm not with their injuries that they've racked up. They got 32 points against Washington. They've had 10 points against Vegas. They had 9 points against Miami. They've done really well this season, but I tend to lean more on a Jacksonville, like getting it together type of week. And, in a big matchup like this where the stakes are high, Jacksonville needs to win this game. They need to win this game. The Bills, they have a little bit more leeway. Like if they lose this game, they don't want to lose this game, but they're in a situation where they're banged up on their defense, and they might want to just get back to the States. They obviously want to get back there with a win, but I think Jacksonville might be in a situation where they need to win more with the upcoming schedule. What are your thoughts on Bills D here?
I don't like it. I'm fine leaving them out of my lineup. I was going to leave both defenses out of my lineup. I could be making a mistake though. I might have to make multiple lineups and make some of these in. I mean, the spike potential is here, right? The Bills got 32 against Washington, and I see that Jacksonville put up 20 last week in their win against Atlanta. So I might need to rethink this. We might need to start working some of these guys in here.
Yeah.
On the defensive end. So what will be our strategy? So these are things that I usually leave out, the kickers and the defenses. I don't love them unless I'm like under, where I project a game like 3 or 4 points under. Then I start to like both these. I didn't have this game projected to go under. What is your strategy in there now? Because I think we have, I always kind of consider them together, defenses and kickers. We have 4 options. How many is too many of these 4 options? Do you just choose one? Can you put 2 in and really stack your lineup? How would you approach it?
If I was taking an under type of script, I might put in 2. Like, I could put in both kickers. Like I've seen that work, like a bunch of times in showdown slates. And if you have a feeling that the game is going to be something like like an 18 to like 15 type of game, it makes a lot of sense to have 2 kickers in there. If you are thinking about defenses, I've been pretty good like with defenses. I've recommended them on a few of these Gamescript shows. This week, I'm not really feeling the defenses just based on the way that I think the game's going to play out. I'm not really high on the defenses this week. I called a pick 6 a couple slates ago. Who was it with? I can't remember who it was with, but they ended up getting a pick 6. The defense in captain actually ended up being the way to go in that lineup. And even though I had my game script like completely like right, I ended up not having the defense in captain, and it ended up costing me. So
Okay.
I don't think that this is a defense captain type of game script, but if you were building 150 lineups, I would just, like project them for what you think you're going to project them for, and let the optimizer just, tell you how much you should put into your player pool, because you don't want to fade them if you're doing 150, but you want to make sure that if you use them, they fit your game script and the projected score and outcome and the way that the game plays out, the game flow that you're expecting.
On a total of 48.5, I have this game projected at 49.6. So in my mind, unless you're projecting a defensive touchdown, I would go with the kickers over the defense.
Yeah, I would too. Yeah, especially with a total like that. Dawson Knox, we covered. Damian Harris, not interested in Damian Harris. He's been getting less and less work with Latavius Murray kind of taking things over. He's been getting, relief work, 6 attempts, 5 attempts, 7 attempts, but he hasn't done anything with it. Don't really have interest for Damian Harris. If I'm going dumpster diving, I think we can find a better running back to go for. And on top of that, Damian Harris is $3,600 in salary, and he's around guys like, Latavius Murray, Dawson Knox, the kickers, guys like that who I would much rather put in my lineup than Damian Harris. What are your thoughts on that spread?
I'm fine completely staying away from him. And if I was the Bills coaching staff, I'd be using Latavius Murray in those red zone goal line situations as well. So not necessarily surprised that he lost his job. More mad at myself for not recognizing that in August and having more Murray shares than Damian Harris.
Yeah. Tyler Higbee, I'm the same way, by the way. I think I drafted too much Damian Harris.
I have way too much hair. Well, I don't know if I have way too much, but I definitely was liking him in the later rounds, just hoping to get a couple spike weeks out of him. And as the season continues, I'm thinking that's less and less likely, barring an injury.
Yeah, not quite as bad as Deion Jackson, who got cut from the freaking Colts, who I like Deion Jackson a lot.
Yeah, and you turned me on to him, and I ended up getting a bunch of him too. And I couldn't believe that he didn't make it. I don't know if you saw the Colts news. They did re-sign Taylor today to a 3-year deal. So
yeah.
I don't know how that's going to affect Sunday, but we'll see if they regret that.
I did see that they're going to work Taylor back in, like kind of steadily work off that rust. So he'll play this week. I mean, the good thing with the Colts is they got Anthony Richardson anyway. So it's like the running back is kind of a little bit obsolete right now over in Indy.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. And it'll be interesting to see on your main builds how many Jonathan Taylors you end up with.
Yeah.
On the main slate. That should be he could completely upend things.
Yeah.
If he has a good game. Like, what if he comes out and he starts rolling and they'll keep feeding him, I believe.
My best ball team on Drafters right now has Jonathan Taylor on that team. It was a team where I stacked Mostert and A-Chain, and obviously those guys both going off. And then I got Jonathan Taylor, who's been on the bench the entire season. So hopefully that team does something.
That's going to be great, yeah.
So moving on to Tank Bigsby, a guy that Spread and I, speaking of best ball, both liked, and he has not done too much for us. He scored 1 fantasy point last week. He scored 7 the week before that, and then 0, and then 6.3. As far as attempts, he's only gotten 3, 2, and 7. He's getting the high leverage attempts, though, coming in and poaching those goal line carries away from Travis Etienne. So what are your thoughts on Bigsby? He might be, like an interesting salary relief guy this week. But what are your thoughts here on Tank Bigsby?
If you're playing Tank Bigsby, you ask yourself, who am I spending up for that I absolutely need? That's gonna force me to. I almost feel like it's a punt at this point. I think Etienne's going to continue to get more and more work as the season goes on. So, some of these guys that we really loved as darlings here, Tank Bigsby, and I see another guy who was my, almost default 20th round pick on DK, best ball, Khalil Shakir. Not too much interest in either of these two players today, unless you make a compelling argument that, hey, I need Allen, I need Lawrence, I need Etienne, I need Cook, right? That's the only way I fall on Bigsby, is if I just decide to kind of punt out that last position.
Yeah, Shakir being a huge disappointment this year. He's had a target a game pretty much, and he hasn't done anything with it. He did score 1 touchdown in week 2, but the guy has been, so far this season, has been Deontay Hardy now. He's kind of taken that role as the wide receiver 3, but he hasn't done a whole lot either. We're looking at 2 targets, 3 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets. So he's an explosive guy. He's a fast guy, but he hasn't done anything this season. And even in these big, scoring games by the Bills, we're looking at like 48 points they scored. They scored 37. They scored 38 points. Like Deontay Hardy hasn't done anything. It's been basically Stephon Diggs and, like a little bit of Gabe Davis.
Yeah, I mean, you just look through the notes, only a 21% snap share. I think, like I said, unless you're just in love with the people on top and you want to punt, I don't see how you can make compelling arguments for any of these players. One thing I'll say about, though, Hardy, he catches when the ball is thrown to him.
Yeah.
So give him credit for that.
Yeah. So we got that going for him. Other than this, Sherfield's the other guy that's in that split there. Sherfield 3-3. Or no, that's the wrong one. 3 targets the past 2 weeks. Hasn't done anything with it either. Hardy, Sherfield, Shakir, they're all in the same boat for me. I don't know if I want to go dumpster diving in a timeshare in the wide receiver 3 spot when they're not getting like any work. But I mean, I could easily see one of those dudes, breaking off a long touchdown. It's bound to happen, like when we're fading it and like ruin the whole showdown slate. But I'm gonna stay away from them this week, and I'm gonna stay away from Jamal Agnew as well. Well, he got 5 targets last. Yeah, you know what? Jamal Agnew, if you're looking for a guy to dumpster dive on, and you're sitting here looking at Bigsby, Shakir, Hardy, and Agnew and Sherfield, like Agnew and Bigsby are the guys I think that I would lean to in that price range. Just knowing how concentrated that Bills offense is, I think that you would be more likely to get something out of like a Jamal Agnew, maybe and Jamal Agnew's a guy that is returning what he's returning kicks or punts spread, so he's got that upside in running back a return.
Yeah, he also does run jet sweeps and stuff for him too.
Yeah.
So you might be able to break off a 9 or 10 or 11 yard run, which, oh, wow, whoop-de-doo. But when you're only paying, what's his price tag? $1,000. That 10-yard run could help him pay off that salary there and then allow you to get the guys you want up top.
Yeah. Yeah. If I was doing a lineup where I had a dumpster dive in this price range and I had, my 5 guys that I liked as my core, I would make sure that if I put in a Bigsby lineup that I also, swap him out for an Agnew lineup too. Because I could see, like Agnew, doing something. He's been integrated in that offense in the past too. Like last season, he had some pretty good moments, but he just hasn't done anything yet this year. But Jamal Agnew is a guy that if you need that salary relief, just keep him in your player pool. So let's take a look at a chalky build of a lineup here, Spread. And I think, when you're looking at chalk, I don't think you're going to get any chalkier than putting Josh Allen in the captain spot. And, maybe we can kind of build a lineup around that. I think if we're doing that, we want to put Diggs in there too, because we want, we need Diggs to have, a decent game if Josh Allen's going to be putting up a captain type of number. What are your thoughts there?
Probably going to be the chalkiest build. Bills are 6-point favorites going into this game, and it's hard not to like Josh Allen, who, as of right now, when I'm listening to a lot of podcasts, a lot of people have him to be the favorite to be the MVP.
Yeah. So if we got Diggs in there to Allen, maybe on the other side, maybe they're having a little bit more, success in the run game, or do you want to go with a, maybe the Jags are passing and forcing.
Yeah, I would go that. I think that we want to, if you're going with this start, that's the game script that the Jags are behind, playing from behind, a lot of targets, maybe going against a softer defense.
Yeah. Okay, so do we want to go maybe Calvin Ridley? Maybe Calvin Ridley gets it together, or do we think we kind of go with Christian Kirk and hope that he maintains that the target share that he's been getting?
At the prices this week, Christian Kirk's my favorite player on this slate.
Okay, so let's
if I build multiple lineups, my highest exposure is going to Kirk.
Okay, so we got Christian Kirk in there. Now we're looking at 4,400 per remaining spot. We got 3 spots left. I think with a build like this, we got Allen Diggs. Allen and the captain. Maybe we want another Bills receiver in here. Gabe Davis would be interesting, but maybe we put one of those tight ends in there. What do you think of that, Spread?
I think the way we built so far, we have to go with the tight end.
Okay.
When you have Josh Allen as your captain, you've really eliminated your ability to have fun with these flexes.
Yeah.
We've almost walked ourselves into doing what we were talking about earlier that we didn't like, and having a player a full punt at 1 or 2K. So let's go with one of the tight ends. Who do you prefer, Kincaid or Knox?
I'm going to put Kincaid in there because if I got Stephon Diggs, I need to justify Stephon Diggs not putting up a captain score. And Kincaid is more of a guy who's going to be taking away those, like non red zone.
The 20 to 20 target.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to put Kincaid in there. That leaves us with 4,100 left per position. I think in this situation, we want to put in a kicker. This is the type of build I'm using a kicker in spread that we were talking about earlier, just because we want to get a guy in there that is kind of keeping Trevor Lawrence out of this lineup. And Trevor Lawrence, to slow down his scoring, maybe they're able to move the ball because obviously the Bills are passing. So we want the Jaguars to have success in the passing game too. But we want them to stall out, and maybe a guy like Brandon McManus is coming in there and hitting those high leverage situations where the Jaguars can't, close the deal.
Sounds good. Where did we land? 4,100?
Yep, that leaves us with 4,100 left. And, that kind of puts us in a position where we could put in Latavius Murray. Maybe he gets one of those, high leverage carries. Although, we might want to go away from that because we want Latavius Murray to fail because we want Josh Allen to get those types of touchdowns. I think, like the optimizers are trying to push towards more Bills in these builds. So you might want to look towards, like a guy like Deontay Hardy or Khalil Shakir, whoever's projected higher, to kind of and then just leave some salary on the table or something. Or if we put in, if we took out Dalton Kincaid and we put in, like a Khalil
Dawson
Shakir,
Knox. Just put a different one in there.
Knox. Yeah, let's try Dawson Knox. That leaves us with 5,300. We could get another kicker in if we did that. So that would be interesting. We could get another kicker in. We could get the Bills D in if we wanted to in that situation. This kind of build would make sense to have a Bills D in because we only got 2 guys on the Jacksonville side, and we don't have any Trevor Lawrence representation. So Bills D would make sense there. And then we obviously got Latavius Murray and all these other guys, Tank Bigsby, any of those cheap guys.
Do you like Bill's defense more than Bass, Tyler Bass?
In
this build?
No. I said like just as an option. I like Bass the best. Yeah. I'd go 2 kicker in a build like this, most likely. Unless we wanted to do 2 tight ends, like because knowing the success that the tight ends have had against the Jaguars, like I don't hate, like 2 tight ends, and that would differentiate yourself because I don't think a lot of people are going to click on 2 tight ends in a chalky or in a Josh Allen like captain build. So, I mean, you could do something like that. That would definitely differentiate yourself to have 2 tight ends from Buffalo's side in your lineup. So
I'll tell you what, on this build, I like our last options a lot more.
Yeah. I
mean, so this would be a fun one to use the first 5 as your template, and then you go 1 Kincaid, 1 Bass, 1 Bills.
Yep. Just swap them out. Yep. So okay, so let's clear this one and Spread. I want you to envision like a game script here of who you like in the captain and what kind of story we can tell about how that guy ends up being the highest scorer on the slate.
Yeah, we're going to go with Christian Kirk here. If Trevor Lawrence is hitting some big bombs, Ridley's getting plenty of attention. We know that McDermott can scheme away these number 1 receivers. Ridley hasn't shown the ability to necessarily produce in coverage. It seems like his success has come when the scheme has allowed it to him, and I don't think that Lawrence is going to force it to him. Ridley gets extra defensive coverage. That gives us some ideas for Christian Kirk, and we know he's a burner. He gets a couple big receptions and a touchdown. He's going to be my captain here.
Yeah, I like that. Who do we have next? What would we? Which direction do we go next?
So then we should add Trevor, right? If we do that. So now
Yeah.
I'm at. I've spent 20K. I got 28.3 left, and now. Oh wait, I hit Diggs on accident. Trevor here. I have 29.1 left. Now I think we have a lot of fun options here because we left more salary on the table by not having Allen as our captain or even Trevor in this type of build. So you talked about it earlier to avoid, which other offensive players would we like to match with these guys if we're going to start on this Jacksonville covers or maybe even win straight up build?
I think I think we want Josh Allen, obviously, because just the raw points.
Okay.
I think this lineup would make sense to be one to leave Diggs out, just because we got Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk already in there as expensive guys, and if we add Josh Allen, that would be another expensive guy in there. So we're likely not going to be able to afford to get a guy like Diggs in there. We could try to if you want to go in that direction, but what are your thoughts?
No, I don't. I'm fine staying away from Diggs. I think that he had a great matchup last week. I think this week's going to be much tougher for him.
Okay.
I'm fine leaving Diggs out of my line. I mean, you're going to have to fade someone. You're going to have to take some stands here.
Yeah.
And I'm fine going off the guy who had a huge week last week.
Cool. So if we got Josh Allen in there, where do we want to go next in your how you would envision this game playing out, Spread?
Let's put Travis Etienne in there, and then we're going to have 8,300 left for our last two spots.
Okay. Yep, I like Etienne in this build too, because if Trevor Lawrence is hitting Christian Kirk and they're playing with a lead, obviously they're going to want to kill a lot of that clock because they don't want Josh Allen to get the ball. And it makes a lot of sense to have Etienne in there. And Etienne, if he's having success, and that means that they're executing on their strategy there. And that leaves us also with 4,150 per position left. Who do we go with next, Spread?
Now we're in that same little range here. Off the top, I was kind of thinking Kincaid and the Jaguars defense. But maybe we want to go with the kickers again. What do you think?
I like Kincaid and I like kickers best, but yeah, I see why you would use the Jags because just for that salary relief. I mean, we've seen it with Josh Allen before. And now the first episode of this that I did it with Bob Gomes, and one of the stories that I was telling in that episode was that Josh Allen has had a propensity to melt down in some of these big games that he's played. And, he reverts back to that old mistake making Josh Allen. And I kind of projected that would happen against the Jets. And it ended up happening. We ended up nailing the script, but freaking Aaron Rodgers ended up getting hurt on that first series, which killed all our lineups that we built. But I was right about the Jets, coming through as a defense and having a huge week as a defense. But in this matchup, I'm kind of torn. I don't hate it because we got the situation where obviously the Bills are flying in a couple days ago, where Jacksonville has been in and situated in London for the last 2 weeks or wherever they're at, London. I think that there is definitely a potential that the Jags defense could be hyped up for this game and that Josh Allen could be a little sluggish. So I do think that it would make sense to have some exposure to that Jacksonville defense. If you
in a weird way, I think it correlates.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because if Jacksonville gets a defensive score, I mean, that's really what we're going to need. I guess we don't need it to pay off, but I really like it.
Yeah.
But then the offense is humming. Now Josh Allen's playing from behind, and I can still get there. I don't know. Having Allen in the Jaguars defense, I don't know how many times that works out.
You know what I like about this this build? Josh Allen's going to get the raw points no matter what. So you very rarely want to fade Josh Allen, but there's no harm at all in playing the opposing defense with Josh Allen because Josh Allen.
Oh, you don't think so? Okay, that was my
No,
concern.
not at all. No, especially if he's only in the flex position too. Like if he was in the captain, and you wanted to differentiate your lineup, like one way that you could differentiate lineups this week going with this type of game script is if you had Josh Allen captain and have the Jaguars D going against him, like expecting him to take a bunch of risks and make a bunch of mistakes, but still, have that upside of connecting on, running in a couple touchdowns or, connecting on a deep ball with one of his pass catchers. But yeah, for this build here, especially when we got ETN in there, we got Christian Kirk, a guy who's likely going to be getting more of a PPR workload than necessarily like hitting on a long play. But I think in this build, it makes sense that Christian Kirk would hit it on a long play because we got Trevor Lawrence in there. But Christian Kirk would also be racking up that PPR points. And then we got Travis Etienne in there to maybe like when they get in the end zone or in the red zone, Travis Etienne takes one of those touchdowns. And then we got the Jaguars D. Maybe they're giving the Jags a short field to work with. And in that situation, we got Josh Allen. Most people are going to want to stack him with a pass catcher. But, I'm looking at these options. We got like Dalton Kincaid. Yeah, we could stack him with Dalton Kincaid. That would make sense. We could also stack him with Tyler Bass because maybe, like Josh Allen's, pass catchers aren't coming through. They're a little sluggish. But Josh Allen is racking up points in the running game, and he's, willing them to get into the end zone. And, they can't convert because Jacksonville's defense is stepping up. That's why we got the Jags in there. And then that leaves it open for Tyler Bass to come in there and take some of those points away from these guys. Dalton Kincaid also and Dawson Knox also fit in a build like this with those guys. Dalton Kincaid from the perspective of between the 20s, and then Dawson Knox in the perspective of like maybe he's getting past a couple touchdowns, and that also would help Josh Allen. So I think this last spot, there's a lot of different ways that you can go that fit in with the game script that Spread just built.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun, and it's a great way to talk about it. I never thought about Tyler Bass here when I was doing that, but that's a great option here when you're looking at this build. So yeah, this is a fun one.
Yeah, this is a good build because it leaves you a good core here, and then you can do a rotation on some of these. It leaves you in a good range to do a rotation on a few of these guys if you wanted to put this, 5 or 6 variations of this lineup into the tournament this week. Okay, so I'm gonna go with a build here. I like Travis Etienne a decent amount this week. I just think that he's got a decent matchup, and that stat that I was talking about earlier about how the Bills are allowing like a good amount of yards after contact. I think if Etienne can get it together this week, he's been sluggish to start the season, but he's going to come alive at some point, and they need him this week. So I could see Etienne having a decent game this week. If I have Etienne in the captain, I want the Jaguars to take a lead because the way that they play, they run with the lead and they throw to get the lead. So let's say that Calvin Ridley comes alive this week. He's able to, break off, one of those big touchdowns with Tre'Davious White out of the lineup this week. Let's say that Christian Kirk's getting affected a little bit more than what we would like with Zay Jones. That gives me Calvin Ridley maybe steps up and has a big game. And obviously I want to have in Josh Allen for those raw points. So Josh Allen is getting the raw points while these guys are getting the lead for Jacksonville. I'm going to fade Diggs in this lineup because, if I don't have Allen or Diggs as the captain, like it's going to be hard for Diggs to score enough points to justify having him in this lineup. And from there, I think I'm going to go with Tyler Bass, because I think that Buffalo is going to be able to move the ball to get into scoring position. But same principle. If Josh Allen is like not putting up points to be the captain, then I want him to be able to kind of the Bills to come in there and mop up those points regardless. So I got those guys in there. I think from there I might go double kicker in a build like this. If I went double kicker in a build like this and put in McManus too, just knowing the type of points that those guys can put up, and wanting ETN to be the highest like raw point scorer, or at least enough to justify being the captain. I don't want to have too much success in the passing game. That's why I don't have Trevor Lawrence in a build like this. And that leaves a position to use guys like Evan Ingram, Zay Jones. Maybe Zay Jones is doing well in this game. Dalton Kincaid, basically the same list of guys, but leaves you with a little bit more options. Having 6,100. If you wanted to do something a little bit different, if you wanted to take maybe McManus out of there and put in Kirk, what would that leave us with? That leaves us with 3,700. In that situation, we could do that same thing that Spread just did with the Jags D. We got Bigsby. I wouldn't want to put Bigsby in there with ETN and the captain, but then we also got like Shakir and Hardy and Agnew. Like those guys that we could put in there and just basically cross our fingers. But I would probably want to put another Jag in here just to have a 4-2 build. I want to have 4-2 Jacksonville build, just because we know that most people are going to have heavy Buffalo exposure in this contest this weekend, just based on what the optimizers and what the Vegas line is telling us. So this is another way that you could go. Leaves us with options, but just basically gives a general view of how you don't have to go with that chalky Buffalo heavy build. If you think through this game, you look at the circumstances, you consider the offensive line improvements for Jacksonville that they're getting this year. We've been waiting for Jacksonville to break out all season, and now they have improvements on their offensive line that should put Trevor Lawrence in sync with his receivers a little bit more. They've been barely missing on having some big plays so far this season. Receivers have been toe tapping out of bounds in the end zone. Like Travis Etienne hasn't gotten it to going to so far this season, and like with Cam Robinson back in improving that offensive line, maybe that helps the running game too. So that puts all these Jacksonville guys in play, and then you top it all off with the injuries that the Bills have on defense, with Tre'Davious White going out, and then Greg Rousseau is not going to be playing this week either. So those are some big gaps to fill for Buffalo on the defense, and everything is priming right now for Jacksonville to finally wake up and show the offense that we all expected to see going into this season. And then to top it all off, they've been in London for 2 weeks already, and meanwhile, Buffalo's just flying in. So they're going to still be feeling the effects of, we gotta fly to London and play this game, whatever. Like Jacksonville's relaxed; they've been there for 2 weeks. Like they're used to their environment. And they've been focused on the game for 2 weeks because they didn't have to worry about taking a flight. Meanwhile, Buffalo has probably spent the majority of the week just dreading having to fly over to London, so there's a lot of stuff that could impact Buffalo negatively to lead to a Jacksonville game script. And then on top of that, Spread and I both like Jacksonville in general this week.
Yeah. Even if we looked at it, even if this game was played over here in the States, it's a huge letdown spot.
Yeah.
We play these a lot, and it's hard to be up every single week. And we know that game against Miami was circled on their calendar, and it became 10 times more important when they took that loss to the Jets, because that was the divisional fight. They couldn't afford to lose 2 division games against a power, because Miami's going to continue to keep winning. We have to admit what they're doing down there is fantastic, and it's exciting for the league. It sucks. It's awesome for everyone except for the other NFC East fans, right?
Yeah.
for me out here on the West Coast, right? Raiders fan, like, oh, cool. Great job, Miami. This is some exciting football for us to watch on Sunday. So I also think it's a lit down spot as well. So great opportunity here for Jacksonville, but we'll see how it plays out, because if you take out a lot of those conditions and you just run it numerically, like, for example, I have this final score at 28-21. So I actually do have the Bills covering in my projections, but my projections have no way of really capturing things like lit down spots and travel, which is something that I need to manually adjust, which is why I do like the Jaguars here. Because I would give about 1.5 for the travel and maybe a 0.5 point for that let down spot.
Yeah, a lot of mental things that people don't consider with like traveling like that. And it's just a hassle. Like I used to have to travel like every week. Like when I was working for Impact Wrestling, I used to have to travel like every.
You
week.
Worked for them?
Yeah, I worked for.
We're talking about that after the show. Okay,
like
wow.
9 years I worked for them, and I had to do a bunch of traveling, and I just I hated it. You dread it, and especially if you're going like overseas, like that's even worse, because it's just like they're not going overseas for a vacation; they're going overseas to work, and they're going to be doing it for like 3 days or however long they're staying over there, and then they got to fly all the way back. So they're like thinking to themselves, "Oh, this is gonna suck," but it's hard to focus when you're when you're in a situation like that.
Another interview I saw too said that the younger guys really struggle with the food.
Yeah.
You travel around America, you're used to what you get, right? I mean, even change. You can go in and order your favorite thing.
Yeah.
So they're getting some of the room service. The portions are like a third of what we get here.
Ooh, yeah.
And these guys are way bigger than us, right? Because I'm thinking these are small portions when I'm in Europe.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff going on.
I've been through that. When I haven't been to the UK in a while, but last time I went, I just remember the cans being tiny, like the cans that they're starting to, do variations of for, like different sodas and whatever in the States now. Like that's been over in the UK for like years, and that's like the standard. So it's just all the portions on like everything are like that, though. They're tiny. So, and these are big dudes. These are like we're talking like 250, 300 pound guys having to get used to that. So
yeah, a lot of the stuff that we're used to is in there. I remember the first thing I did when I got back from the UK after the last visit was go get a taco. Yeah, because it really felt like I was eating a ton of Indian food over there. Because that was the most filling food for the bang for your buck there on the trip.
Yeah, and one thing that I will add too, like a little nugget, I was what you were talking about earlier, Spread, when you listen to all the are you reading the local stuff, right? Like I listen to like Locked On podcasts. Like
those are great too. You want the team focused ones.
Yeah. And I can't remember which podcast I was listening to, but the dude was saying, it was a beat writer, and he interviewed Josh Allen, the defensive guy on the Jags side. Mm-hmm. And he interviewed him and said, so what's it like playing against another Josh Allen, right? And the defensive Josh Allen got pissed, right? He was like, I hate that there's another Josh Allen. He was legitimately pissed, like about there being another guy named Josh Allen that was getting all the credit in the NFL. And he had like a wicked chip on his shoulder about it. And the last time that these guys played, I think he sacked him like a whole bunch of times. So don't be surprised if you see like Josh Allen on the Jags defense, like have a decent game this week, just because it's something like just absolutely ridiculous, but it's like it's a nugget nonetheless,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's the type of things that you need, right? that we're looking for here, because with the rise of these stems, everybody's doing optimal. It's the same thing as the poker boom.
Yep.
You know, when you first started playing, nobody was playing optimal. Then everybody started reading. Everyone started going to the 2+2 forums. Everybody bought. And now everybody's playing game theory optimal. And it's actually, you know, everyone goes, poker's a game of skill. I said, well, if 9 people at the table are playing optimal, it's actually a game of luck.
Yeah.
If everybody's playing optimal, there's no edge. So
right.
we have to do things to get different here. And sometimes it could be, and it might not even be based in fact, right? Well, Josh Allen doesn't like that there's another Josh Allen, but we need to do some sort of things to go ahead and try and get different here. And I think it's fun to take some of these narratives, especially in a showdown slate, right? Where there's only one game and something like that, you know, him having a big 3-sack day or a forced fumble, something like that completely changes the way that everything's going. So sometimes these little narratives sound silly, but that's what you're going to have to do, because the days are gone where you could just throw an optimal lineup in there and cash more often than not. If you put an optimal lineup in there, you're duping with everybody.
You know, one of the big things that I had when I recommended DJ Moore and the captain on Thursday was I was you know, reading an article, and I read that the cornerback who was going to be on DJ Moore the most, like, he got burned so bad by AJ Brown in the previous week that he deleted his X account. Like, he was just getting so much shit, and he had, you know, given up a bunch of plays like throughout the season to these number one wide receivers, and he's a rookie cornerback. The poor guy has been having to guard these number one receivers, and, you know, like, all the points, the DK points that were going to that position, on top of, you know, this dude deleting his X account, just that one little blurb put me over the top on DJ Moore, to the point where, you know, like, I went from, you know, like 70% confidence to like 90% confidence on DJ Moore at captain. But like, it definitely helps when you get on an angle and you do enough research to just kind of support it, so that you feel like 100% confident in what you're playing in these. And it's all narrative driven with Showdown. It's all about, you know, coming up with a game script and figuring out how that game script is going to happen.
And the poor young man in question that you're speaking about is named Emmanuel Forbes, and it's starting to feel bad for him. And you're saying,
I do. Yeah.
Why do you keep putting him up against the number ones? And why did we not make an adjustment after the first 100 or 150 yards? You just left him out there.
Right.
It's a tough scene there.
Yeah, I feel bad for the dude too. He's a rookie. The poor guy's a rookie, and there's no way his confidence is going to.
That's where coaching and development matters so much.
Yep.
You can't just let them get torched like that. You got to double, triple, move them to CB2.
Right.
Give them a couple series off. That's where coaching and development is so much, where sometimes, boy, these teams can't draft. I always say, maybe they just can't develop.
Yeah.
Maybe these players would have been fantastic under a Belichick or a Pete Carroll, or guys like Mike Tomlin, guys that really teach.
Right.
You know, maybe they're going to a guy like my guys back here, Josh McDaniels. The guy's not teaching, just expecting everyone to know everything, and he's just sitting there dialing up plays all day and not actually really teaching and developing these guys. So,
well, based on what Ron Rivera, like, not even knowing who Sam Howell was or whatever, you know, like, to you know, give him a shot as the starting quarterback, it was the Taylor Heineke had to say, hey, let's give Sam Howell a shot as the starting quarterback. He gave up his spot to give Sam Howell a shot as starting quarterback because Ron Rivera never, like, paid attention in practice or whatever, and barely knew who.
Has anyone tried to get fired through a press conference more than Ron Rivera?
It's ridiculous.
He says stuff that I would not admit, even if it was true.
Oh yeah, there's been and yet he still has his job. Like, this has been going on for years, and he still has his job. So I don't you know.
I know why. It's because he's a high character guy.
Yeah,
and I, you know, obviously I'm disappointed in that Forbes decision, but overall I think he's a pretty good teacher. I just think that the way the game has changed is just too much for him at this point, and just being a good guy doesn't matter. And I don't know which sports changed more in the last 10 years, the NFL or the NBA, but both sports. And hey, probably what we just did, right, in building these lineups has a lot to do with it, but they've emphasized scoring. And this old defense wins championships. Yeah, in 1992 it did. They've changed the rules. All the top contenders in the NFL have the best offenses. In the NBA, the number one offense in the league won last season. Denver had a great defense too. I'm not discounting them on that side of the ball, but it was the top offense in the league that won. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's the top offense in the league this year, because we're looking at, who are Super Bowl favorites. San Francisco, Kansas City, Buffalo. I mean, these teams put up points. So because of the way things have changed, and it's too bad for a guy like Ron Rivera, who's a great person.
Yeah.
And I think he's actually a pretty good coach. I just think the game's passed him by.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. So, Spread, why don't you tell people where they can find you and find your content this season?
All right. Well, if you're living in the Houston area, I am on the Wagering World that airs on ESPN 97.5, The Game, on Friday nights at 7 p.m. So we gave out some winners on that show last night. We're doing YouTube shows on Nuke the House and Fanspeak, where we're going over the NFL card. We do a review show on Monday, and then on Thursdays and Fridays, we'll kind of look forward to the upcoming weekend with our picks. And Simon, we're about 3 weeks away from really my bread and butter, the NBA season. So the NBA rundown will be returning. Follow me at Spread Astaire, and you can pretty much catch all the content that I'll be producing.
Good stuff. Yeah, definitely check out Spread stuff. Make sure you subscribe to this channel at Heatseeker Sports. Subscribe at Heatseeker Sports over on X. I'm at Pumacom over on X, and we appreciate you guys watching. And speaking of Nuke the House, I should have Keg joining me on one of these game scripts in the next couple weeks or so. So him and I have been talking, and I'm going to get him on one of these episodes to break down a game. And until
that'll be great. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, for sure. Like Spread and Keg break down these games great from a betting perspective, and as you can see, Spread's process with building one of these showdown lineups just based on a game script that he thinks he can envision seeing the game play out. Like, you get a lot of value out of that. So make sure to keep watching and subscribe to the channel, and you get all that content. So until next time, have a good one.